Okay, and you're on.
Okay, late night from Willowdale on my birthday, and we're here in Goulding Park in Willowdale, and we haven't done a video in a couple of months, and we want to keep the channel alive, so just a few topics. We're actually going to try to keep this to 10 minutes. I know I always say that in the videos, we never do, but we're just going to keep this to a few topics. So we'll start with still what's a big story is the war in Ukraine, and where's it going to end, and what's, foreign affairs says the world after the war. It's like, what kind of world are we going to live in? Nobody really knows how this the Russian invasion of Ukraine and which is now a war in the eastern part of Ukraine is going to end. You can get all these different analysis. Nobody really knows. But I think in the end, there will be some territorial, as I said in the video a few months ago, that it'll be a messy compromise. There will be some territorial compromises. I think parts of the eastern Ukraine will end up with Russia. And that's I'll be shocked if that doesn't happen. It's not fair, it's not right, but the world's not the world's not a fair place. But if Ukraine emerges out of this as a sovereign, strong democracy, then that's a good thing. If they lose some of the eastern Ukraine to the Russians, which is horrible, but a lot of people in the eastern Ukraine are Russian speaking, and I don't think it's the end of the world if parts of the eastern Ukraine go to Russia. Even though Russia doesn't deserve it, shouldn't have it, what they did was illegal and horrible, and Russia's committed all sorts of war crimes, and that's not the way the country should be acting in 2022. But unfortunately, that's, I think, the way this war in Ukraine is going to end. They say, a lot of people say, like Macron says, Russia shouldn't be humiliated. Well, that's true, but Russia needs to pay a price, and they are. Yes, the high oil prices are giving Russia a lot of money. The Russian economy is actually doing pretty good, but the sanctions are hurting, and they will hurt in the long term. So yeah, Russia will probably get a bit of land when this all ends, but they're going to be isolated for a long time, and the Russian economy will start to hurt because these sanctions aren't going away, and Western companies that left Russia aren't coming back anytime soon, and Russia's going to fall short on all sorts of materials, semiconductors, all sorts of things that they need to keep their military in operation, all sorts of little things they need to keep their industry in operation. They won't be able to get. So Russia, in a sense, has been humiliated because they didn't do as well as they thought, and military analysts and thinkers and scholars will be studying this war for a long time and saying, where did Russia go wrong? How did they screw things up so royally? And people will be studying how the Ukrainians did so well. It's still not over yet. This will go on for a while, but in the end, there will be Ukraine will be forced to make some territorial concessions in the eastern Ukraine, and that doesn't mean Russia won. They did not. They're isolated. Their economy will hurt for a long time. So I know, and nobody knows how this will end. Once wars start, no one knows how they will end. But yeah, we are in a different world. Europe's in a different place. Putin as I said a couple of months ago, as everyone said, Putin made probably the biggest strategic error in modern history. I mean, it totally backfired on him. NATO is more strengthened than ever. Finland and Sweden are now joining NATO. It's just, this will go down in the modern history as one of the dumbest things that a country could do. How long Putin remains in power, we don't know. We don't know the internal dynamics in Russia. But Russia made a mistake. They were warned that they would suffer retaliation. They didn't believe it. I said it in a video months ago that if Russia had just left it the way it was at the end of January and pulled back somewhat, I think Russia had in a sense already won. They got the West's attention. Everyone was willing to talk to Putin about restructuring security architecture in Europe. But then he pulled the trigger and invaded Ukraine, and then it was all lost. Russia became isolated. Putin became one of the most disgraced people on the planet Earth. And Russia lost a lot of, well, if they had any credibility, but Russia lost a lot, and they will suffer for a long time. So the bottom line, I'm not going to belabor this because no one knows how this is going to end. But I think everyone knows there will be some territorial concessions. Weapons will continue to flow to Ukraine. They'll put up a good fight. But in the end, some diplomatic solution will happen. I do think Ukraine will have to give up some of the eastern Ukraine. But Ukraine can still remain a viable, sovereign, democratic state, join the European Union, and Russia will remain isolated for many years. So that's what's probably going to happen. Not tomorrow, maybe not this month, but I don't see this war going on into the winter. So we'll see what happens. I think I said earlier, I think July would be a pivotal month, but who knows? We'll see. The bottom line is, as I said in the video a few months ago, it'll be an ugly compromise. It won't satisfy everybody. Wars generally don't end well, and it won't be an outright victory for Russia for certain, and certainly not for Ukraine. But there'll be a messy compromise, but Ukraine will remain a vital and viable democratic state, probably going into the EU. NATO is strengthened. Everything Putin wanted, he won't get. So, other than maybe a bit of eastern Ukraine. So it backfired on him big time. People will be studying this for if the world survives, people will be studying this for many, many, many years. What a big error and mistake Putin made. Now, to end that, because I could go on about Ukraine, but no, we'll see what happens in the next month or two. Let me move on to what the Ukraine war is. People say what the war in Ukraine and the oil industry. Yeah, a lot of Russian oil has gone off the market, but a lot of it hasn't. It brings me to the whole sort of the big issue, the so-called energy crisis. Everyone's comparing this to the 70s. And it's a bit much. First of all, what this has exposed is the fallacy of people's commitment to climate change. All right? You remember climate change, oceans are rising, it's getting hot everywhere. Nobody cares. Everyone wants cheap gas, okay? This is what the war in Ukraine is. It's exposed the fallacy of that people care about the climate change. They don't, okay? People don't. They want cheap gas. And they want it cheap in Canada, they want it cheap in the US, they want it cheap in Europe. And look, the most incredible example of how horrible this is that President Biden is going to go to Saudi Arabia
and fall off a bike.
Yeah, fall off a bike in Saudi Arabia, meet with one of the great butchers of the planet Earth, Mohammed bin Salman, as we call him, Murder bin Salman, a real nasty piece of work, to get the Saudis to pump more oil. In my opinion, Biden has lost all credibility on human rights and whatever. You can't call Putin a war criminal, a thug, and all that, and then go to Saudi Arabia and bow down to MBS, murder bin Salman, and say, hey, pump more oil so we can have cheap gas in the United States. Like, it's sickening. It's so sickening, it's beyond the pale. Saudi Arabia despite some of the reforms that murder bin Salman made, MBS, they're like, women still are tracked. They still have trackers on women so men can track where their wives go. People in the women in the women's movement are tortured and arrested constantly. It's a horrible, horrible place. It's Orwellian. It's disgusting. Saudi Arabia is a country that should be isolated. Like, nobody should have. I've said this before. Nobody should have relations with that medieval 13th century torture chamber. So Biden's going down there so Americans can get cheap gas. So he loses all credibility, in my opinion, particularly on the world stage. You can't call Vladimir Putin a war criminal and then meet with murder bin Salman. It's just so anyways,
But isn't that part of a larger kind of like distributed solution to say things like rare earth minerals and lithium, where you deal with a mixture of Western countries like Australia and others, and Saudi Arabia is just one little part of that, right? When it comes to oil, like, I mean, maybe it's worth it in the end. I don't know.
Well, that's a complicated story about rare earth minerals and mining, and Canada has lots of it, right? Which is we're not going to get into that tonight because I want to keep this relatively short. But the world is awash in oil. Okay, Canada produces lots of oil. The Americans produce lots of oil. There's lots of oil around. Biden doesn't have to go begging off to Saudi Arabia. And I know there are other issues involved. He wants to talk about Yemen. He wants to talk about this. There are other issues. They want to have some sort of deal with this sort of strategic coalition that includes Israel. Again, they want to create a Middle East NATO against Iran, which is silly. Just get along with Iran. Iran's a miscreant sometimes and a bad player, but the better thing is to just get along with them. The Saudis are talking to Iran. Like, it's a kind of a weird game, but the last thing we need is like a military alliance in the Middle East. Includes the Gulf states, Egypt, Israel, the Saudis, allied against Iran. We don't need that.
Well, apparently Iran's been talking to a lot of Gulf states and Middle Eastern states like for a long time.
Iran has good relations with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Qatar, and they're talking to the Saudis, and they're probably even talking to the Israelis. I mean, they have a shadow war with Israel. I mean, the Israelis are killing lots of Iranian scientists and military officials. They have a shadow war with Israel, but I bet the Iranian officials are talking to the Israelis too. Like, it's kind of a weird shadow game that's going on. But it would be better just to try to get along with Iran, despite how crazy that country is. I mean, Iran is far less crazy and nutty than Saudi Arabia. I mean, people have rights in Iran. Women have rights in Iran. Iran is one of the more democratic countries in the Middle East. So, I mean, that's a whole, and I've talked about this before in previous videos. The bottom line is, the climate change agenda and climate, as we've seen through the war in Ukraine and the rise in gas prices and oil and all that, is that nobody cares about climate change. People want cheap gas, they want cheap oil, and it's exposed. And the people who want, renewables are important, but people realize the renewables, they're not. First of all, they're hard. They're not coming on market fast enough, and people still need the basic fossil fuels, horrible as that is, and I find, and I'm going to end on this, I find this whole climate change debate and climate changer, the environmental movement, a bit of a laugh. Okay, I sit in the park, and even here Goulding here in Willowdale, and I sit in the park where I am, Winston Churchill Park at St. Clair and Spadina, and it's always windy, okay? Always windy. There's always wind. And I don't see windmills anywhere. Why aren't there windmills on top of every apartment building, every office building? Why aren't there solar power units on every apartment building, the roofs of every apartment building, house, office building? They're not. It's a joke. If alternative energy renewable energy is not a panacea. Everyone knows that, but it would help. But we're not really committed to it. On southern Ontario, it's so windy, given its location, squeezed between all the Great Lakes, and yet I don't see windmills anywhere other than the big one down by the CNE. There should be windmills on top of every building in this city, and should be solar power units at every new house built, and solar power units at every roof. In California, now you can't build a house in California without putting solar power units on its roof, and that should be the case in Canada too. So I find I don't take the climate change issue that seriously. It's happening. The world is slowly dying. But there's lots of little things we could do we don't do. I live in a building where everyone says they're concerned about the environment, but everyone's got an air conditioner. Air conditioning is one of the worst things for the planet. Everyone drives a car. I live in a building where we have subway lines and streetcar lines and everything, but everyone drives a car. So I don't think anyone cares. The people say Canadians care about climate change. They don't give a damn. They want cheap gas. They want their air conditioners. No one cares. The planet's dying and nobody cares. And the environmental movement is a bit of a fraud. And the war in Ukraine, and sort of the energy crisis that it's somewhat precipitated, has shown that the joke about people's concerns about the environment, because they don't. People want cheap gas, and Biden's going to go stoop down to one of the biggest scumbags on the planet Earth, so Americans can get cheap gas. It's so pathetic. It's beyond the pale. And anyways, I've gone on. This video has gone on a little longer than planned. So the 3 points I want to make, the last 3 points. The Ukraine war will not end nicely. Nasty compromises will be made. But Russia will be isolated for many years to come. Biden has lost credibility on human rights when he goes to Saudi Arabia. It exposes the whole fallacy of him wanting to be pro-environment and all that, because he doesn't care. And climate change, the whole environmental movement has been exposed because everybody in the world wants cheap gas, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the energy crisis, which I don't think is that serious, but it is in Europe, but the energy crisis that's come out of that has shown that people don't give a damn about the environment. They want cheap gas. So on that note, we'll see where it all goes. And that's it. A little shorter than other videos, but that's it. That's my birthday late night from Willowdale video. And we're here in Goulding Park and in Willowdale, so it's all good. Good night.